Welcome all to the meeting of the Advisory Planning Commission. This is our first time in chamber in a long, long time. And we are not the people that you see the nameplates for. The next meeting, hopefully, we'll have our own names. But before we proceed with the agenda, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the town's support on the Commission's recent recommendations. First, for relocating these meetings from the cramped committee rooms, which not only affected the applicant's ability to provide professional presentation, but also prevented the public's ability to participate as observers. And also that issuing the agency agenda and presentation materials to those subscribing to the town's email newsletter service, and communicating separately from the list of council and committee meetings. And also continuing to the recording of agency meetings and making them available for public consumption and reference until the application process has been completed. The Commission believes that these improvements will lead to a healthier and more productive application process through informed public discussion and debate. Moving to the adoption of the agenda. I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please. Susan, and seconded by Walter. All those in favor? Okay. Approval of the minutes. I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented from the April 27th meeting. Susan, Walter, all those in favor? Is there any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, then before we move into the application, let me read an announcement. This is a meeting of the Town of Pelican Beach Advisory Planning Commission. The Advisory Planning Commission makes recommendations to Council on matters respecting land use, community planning, or related bylaws and permits, as referred by Council or the Director of Planning. The Advisory Planning Commission is advisory, does not have any direct approval, ownership, or authority over matters that are referred to it. Council may or may not adopt the recommendations made by this commission. The following sequence is the folder for each item. We only have one. There's a short introduction to the application by town staff, then a presentation by the applicant. There'll be questions to the applicant from the committee. There'd be a discussion amongst the committee members, and then there will be a motion. So turning to the agenda. Our new business is a development permit at 126, 130, 134, 144, and 148 2nd Avenue East. Mr. Staples.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you already noted, this is for 5 properties in an area known as the East Village on 2nd Avenue East. The proposal is to amend the zoning from the current zoning Industrial 1 to a new comprehensive development zone, CD 19. This application went before council on April 6th, and at that time, the application included most of the general intention of the application, but was lacking in some of the details in terms of form and character and landscaping. That information has since been provided, and as such, the referral to the APC has brought us here today. And I won't get into the details of the application because the applicant is very well represented here today, and I think I would prefer that they represent the application for themselves. So I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. The applicant.
And thank you. My name is Dariush Firuzi, architect, resident of Nanaimo in the last 16 years. And I appreciate the time for all the members to be. I've been a couple of design advisory panel myself, so I do know the value of the things you guys bring to the table. So in advance, I appreciate. So important.
We can advance them for you.
And the next slide, which is starting showing the slide and really show everyone will know about the areas, new areas developing. Recently, the brewery already built in this. Unfortunately, don't show that. And lots of ideas, big ideas in that area. Yeah, it's basically between the Berwick and Second Avenue corner. This is the artistic party. The idea is to create the commercial retail at the area. That's why we are providing lots of the commercial in the main store. It's in the connection to the second, where the majority of the pedestrian connectivity gonna be to the brewery and to the downtown. And then build the two apartment buildings at the top of that podium a little bit farther, which will have their own amenity outdoor space in top of that podium. So this shows the main floor. Is expected slope is almost around meter and a half. The dropping from that to that corner. So obviously our podium has to be at one step again. As we mentioned, we do have all commercial facing to the second street there. We do have the access to the parking, and behind all the commercial, we have a parking. 99% of the required parking is all covered underground parking. Behind it is commercial. We do have a main entrance for condo apartment building at the very side. We also have a secondary access from the river to the parking. And all the storage, parking storage, the delivery package that will be at the lease. So here, basically, where we are in the top of the podium, we do have access from Second Street, as we see in the elevation coming up to here, and in the back, in the lane, the slope going very fast, and then almost became flat. Have a couple of parking in the back there too. So two apartments, one is a 5-story above that podium is here. They have 20 units each, and 2 bedrooms, basically 4 units per floor, 5 floors, 20. And then rental building over there, 4-story, each story has a 10 units, over around 40 units. Rental combination of the 1 bedroom, then 2 bedroom, and a couple of bachelors main floor to basically 1 bachelor. That is, and again goes to the 1 bedroom, and then the design of the project again, because brewery already set up some sort of the modern design. We followed that type of the modern design with more concrete type of the frame, and then filling with the red brick with the glass canopy. We are almost right at the edge of the property. That's why entrance all set in to create that glass canopy to provide the protection and also not project to the city's problem. Okay, and upper floor, again, we continue with the modern look. We use the not the wood cementitious panels. Some of them looks like wood, just to give the warmer looking and also connect it somehow with the colors and the form we have in the main floor. The rest are panels, some aluminum material to create the shape and break down. The idea was because this area is lower portion of the town, and it's lets you to build a little bit higher, and you're not going to be blocking anyone's view, and you are actually putting the sun present for future development. So being more neutral, more modern, give the opportunity to this area to grow as needed. So, and we also wanted to have a quality product out there. That's why condo is 10-foot ceiling, but the apartment building is 9-foot ceiling. Similar line. This is the condo unit size. I know we're going to talk about the more formal character. I'm not going to talk much about the units. There are 2 bedrooms. They have a very generous outdoor space. Next, please. Same about continue. One more. These are the elevation, closer elevation for condo above the back podium. Again, combination of the wood, thick wood looks and the panel. And one more. The detailed unit size around 1,300 each, 20 of them. And next, please. This is the rental building. The corner unit, they have, again, all the units, they have very generous balcony as requested. 2 bedrooms, main, 1 bedroom, and then 2 bedrooms. Those around. This is the bachelor, which is almost 1 bedroom because the bedroom don't have a window and common bachelor. Yeah, please next. A similar continues in other opportunities. And please can continue. And yeah, it's same type of the material used in the rental building. And next, please. We also use the light colors again to be very, less modern and more welcoming type of building. Here is 1 bedroom and then 15, and overall is 40 units, mostly 1 and 2 bedroom and couple of bachelor. Next, please. Section through the area, we see the podium, as you see the lane when we started very low, and then in the higher one, the lane almost became flat, and where it ended up the rental building. And next, please. A type of the view, we understand as this is not correct because it will show the character. Obviously, it's not going to be curved. It will be continuing, but material proposed for Second Avenue for pavers, and these all be part of the city development in the area and very friendly, pedestrian friendly approach. Yeah, we had a couple of here we actually changed the original water feature of the landscape drawing, and we changed it to the landscape material. It will invite more and have a less issue for maintenance, and overall it's better for design. Next, again, couple of night rendering. We've already seen it a couple of times. You may already get tired. But yeah, it's I'm sorry I forgot to introduce, we have our landscape architects, Kate and Chris also, and Zoom. And I do have their slides also in here. To do some presentation next. And one more. We did also the shadow study for the area. Considering the podium, this building is almost 6-story building. In winter time, obviously, we have a longer shade, but you can imagine even these 2-story buildings already have a big shade, so it will have an impact in the winter. In this rendering, we consider all day sunny, but all of us know we don't have that much sun here, so maybe shade actually all over. So next week, as we go to the summertime, as you see, the shades are very minimal, as expected. And the next week, we get back to the winter months, again the shade became longer. And one more. This one I put it by purpose. It's the intersection. Actually, because from the early study, because we are in the lower area, this intersection from Memorial and Friend, showing the building. As you see, the rental building is just 1 story of that, and that's the condo building. You will see 2-story. And so it is not really seen much because of the drop of the area. And some information meeting all the parking requirements for the proposal. We do not request any parking variation variance. And this will be the basic zoning, the intensity and others. We are meeting all those standard sets for the project, for the area. The next will be the landscape. We go to the next. Yeah, landscape. I am here to answer any question, or can you after the landscape architect and presentation?
I think it might be time to have the architect to do your full presentation, and we can ask questions of each as we go through the panel.
Sure. You mean the landscape architect?
Yes, your full presentation.
Thank you. Can we connect with Chris and Kate for their presentation? They are but attending by Zoom.
No, you should.
Oh.
It's going to be the sound.
Hi, this is Chris Midgley speaking. I'm with Kate Steffiuk. Can you hear us? Can you give us a wave? Maybe I can see the committee members. Or Dariush, can you hear us?
Right. Can you try again?
Hello, this is Chris Midgley speaking. I'm with Kate Steffiuk. We're Kinship Design. I just was wondering if you could give me a signal that you can hear. Can you hear us? No? Yes, you can hear us. Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for your time today. In case you missed the introduction, my name is Chris Midgley. I'm here with Kate Steffiuk. We're Kinship Design Art Ecology. And before I get into it, I want to, am I understandable? Our audio, we're having a bit of trouble with the audio. Can Dariush perhaps, or someone give me a nod if I'm coming through clear? Okay, good, excellent. So again, thank you for this opportunity. We're just going to touch quickly on some of the landscape architecture components of this particular project in an exciting and emerging neighborhood within Qualicum Beach, the East Village. So there's two sort of areas that I think are really worth focusing on from a landscape perspective. It's kind of the role and the sort of contribution to the urban fabric of this East Village neighborhood, and then on a sort of an ecological design side, with our choices regarding plants and their function within the environment. So I think the staff report details quite clearly the vision for the East Village, as does the official community plan and other documentation from the town of Qualicum Beach. What we took away from that information was a strong commitment to creating a powerful sort of pedestrian connection that strengthens the continuity to the East Village from the uptown community neighborhood center. And we really wanted to strengthen that by sort of accentuating the pedestrian permeability across the site. And that's largely achieved with a central walkway that sort of defines the site on atop of the podium where the parkade is housed. So you would enter into the, okay, thank you, yeah. And next slide. So again, this details the rationale. Okay, so I'll picking up on this slide. There's 5 core elements that design elements that sort of define this from a landscape perspective. I was just beginning to speak of this urban walk, which runs through the center of the site. And it functions as a walkway and a plaza, a place where people might gather and meet, wait for people they're visiting or going for a walk into downtown or into the downtown portion of Qualicum Beach. There's sort of an entry step feature. And if you direct your attention to the lighting and landscape precedent images on the left side of the screen, the second image kind of on the bottom row starts to capture what we were envisioning for that connection down to the street, to Second Avenue from the development. Some visual interest there with planters integrated into the steps, perhaps other opportunities for accent features as you enter into that portion of the site. That's the second item on the design elements, the entry steps. You might as well go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The third item is this idea of the garden suites. And so if you're looking here in plan view, you can see a generous patio spaces given over to the ground level units, and they're surrounded by a sort of a lush layered planting of largely indigenous plants to create a sort of a garden suite feel. So this is a transitional sort of feeling from the walkway to a planted zone to a sort of that garden suite and then a patio. Throughout the development, we're proposing these raised planters. So you can see a small number 4 on the left side of the walkway. Those raised planters are necessary in order to provide the soil to support the plant life that we're proposing here, to make this almost an illusion of a yard space. And then the final item that I'd like to call your attention to, it's number 5. You can spot it on the plan. It's this green edge notion. And so in collaboration with the architect Daryush and the developers, we've acknowledged that there's a great opportunity to create a sort of a thick green edge surrounding the podium. That would, looking again at the plan, you can see a significant number of trees that surround the perimeter of the podium. And the effect that has from an urban design perspective is to sort of mitigate some of those height factors of the development. So that kind of brings it down and makes it feel like it's ground level almost. And so that kind of mitigates that edge of the podium, and toward the rear of the building, where there's a lane, we're envisioning more of a step sort of feature to the edge of the building, so that we can further sort of thicken that green edge and mitigate the the feeling of the height of the podium and in the rear there, a wall defining the lane. At the street level, you can see on sort of the right side of what's labeled here as residential building 2, some patio spaces, envisioning various sort of uses in that commercial area, say restaurants and that sort of thing, and to further sort of create a transitional environment between the more public streetscape and the building itself with more trees and plantings there. If we can go to the next section, or the next image, we see a section here. So this section, you can see on the key plan running through the Urban Walkway. Again, trying to demonstrate the connection to a sort of a strong and interesting connection to 2nd Avenue East from the podium. So the portion on the left with the smaller trees, there's sort of, you can sort of get a hint at those raised planters with smaller trees, and then the planting sort of cascading down to the street below. What we're trying to create is a strong relationship between the building itself and the public streets on both the lane side and the sort of the pedestrian street of 2nd Avenue. From an ecological perspective, I think you can see by the plan that there's a large amount of green space. I think at a count, we're close to 70 trees that we're proposing at this stage. And like I said, those raised planters to house the soil needed to create a lush and thriving environment with where we're trying to reflect some of the coastal Douglas fir ecosystems that are unique to this area. I think I'll leave it at that and let you return to Dariush. Hopefully that illustrates what we had in mind for the landscape, and feel free to pose any questions when the opportunity arises. Thank you.
For this our introduction, I do have a couple of images of the civil drawing, which I believe under city's control for the area. So if there's any question for any of these parties, I'm here to respond.
Thank you, Dariush. Let's start with, let's go first, Walter. Now, just again, the preface of this portion, these are questions to the applicant to try and get clarification, or to bounce off suggestions to see what your comments will be. This is not for us to comment on the quality of, that comes later. So, just, Walter, would you like to start?
Yeah, got a few questions to direct to staff. I mean, because there's been direction given to us on the review of the application. One of the things that was brought up was with regards to the number of items, which council had directed us to look at. That's the updates to the podium structure along 2nd Avenue. It introduces variation in color and material. What does that mean? Could you give some idea?
Sure. Yeah. Through the chair, through Mr. Hooglin. To understand what these staff recommendations are, you would have had to see the first version of plans. So on that first version, there was no color on the towers, and the facade on 2nd Avenue was a single material. And so what the applicant, the architect has done since that time is vary the material. So there is that concrete band along the top of the lower section, and there is a variation. So that has been responded to.
The other thing is,
Walter, if I could just draw your attention to page 2 of our material, the report to the EC, just above the whole site. The applicant has submitted the information required by council.
yeah, I was just curious there was something that staff had seen that they wanted to discuss. The other thing is, item number, the information on rental units. It's understood that there's 40 rental units. And those, is there going to be a government put on the land for 19 so it remains rental?
So the details on that haven't been worked out. Typically at a minimum, when rental units are proposed, they're a minimum of 10 years for the rental period. It could be that the applicant has a different scenario in mind, could be longer term, but I don't think that the town would entertain a shorter period of time for that.
And also, following that, there's information on building energy efficiency. This word, I had some problems with the application and also having better understanding of town policy efficiencies and some of the levels of energy efficiency. Is there some staff giving directions the applicant what's expected?
No, the town, of course, has the goal of making buildings as energy efficient as possible, but there's not a specific standard that the town prescribes. And so it was more an encouragement that they make it as energy efficient as possible, and at least at a minimum provide clarity on the level that they would be proposing to this development.
I'm allowed to show. The development is targeting step 3 code, the DC building code, which is already 40% of existing building code. This is our target. We think we can achieve that. But it's honestly up to do all the energy modeling, all the detailed design. You cannot for 100% sure say that, but this is what we target. Recently, I would say 80% of my projects, they are step 2 or 3. Some of them has to be for BCR, but some of them just choice of them.
Okay, there's some density bonusing that's being provided because of energy modeling and follow up and outcomes as well. As I understand it.
Not built into the zoning. The mention of density bonuses is in the context of the OCP when we talk about the overall density that's kind of contemplated in zones. So the zoning doesn't have any density bonuses.
Good. Okay, there's you had a comment from staff about slightly higher OCP designation. So, with respect to what is slightly higher, couple or units, 6 units?
Thank you. So the proposal is for 130 dwelling units per hectare. The OCP says 80, but it also allows for 50% for things like underground parking and whatnot. So there's a maximum of 50%, so that gets you 120. So it's the difference between 120 and 130.
I do have a few other questions, and I guess it's got to do with the rationale of the design. Why we did what we did on in the design as presented. You have a main entry to condominiums. It's kind of significant. You get this feeling that with a sense of entry. You're not really showing that entry. It's still the podium seems to be pretty strong structure component of it, and so the entry of the condominium is not really being fully defined, but yet you have an entry of the curve. And I'm looking at the entry of the rental units, and it's coming from the rear, and there's no entry coming out second for the rental unit. So I'm curious why that place, and if you could rationale for that.
Yes. Um, First, regarding the density, I would like to mention working with many municipalities in Ireland from Victoria all over. Most of the some municipalities they looking to densify the downtown area and having like to commercial retail area. And density, basically the number of units you can provide in that area, that's the big reason where the city can be successful. This is the big challenge, for instance, for Nanaimo. They don't have enough density at downtown area, and that's why it is in downtown area. They're not successful or not moving as they should. So, so bringing as much as density to the area is actually supporting all the commercial what you looking for. And the other question, sorry, rational for the trans for rental.
Why an entrance on Urban, not an entrance on a second rental? Should be coming off the lane.
Sure, yeah, sorry, I did work on it for a few minutes and that question. The idea is here to emphasize as much as possible for second. We didn't want to lose any space for entrance. We want to have it maximize that commercial space. Even or starting, we didn't have the second parking access for parking because we wanted to have a more commercial. If you don't have the access to the rental, it has some difficulty in terms of design, accessing and going to the parking and also reducing commercial. Idea was to maximize the commercial. It's and also providing the second street. It seems to me the vision is having more pedestrian time and have reduced even the parking. Car and the traffic, reduce the traffic of the vehicle and stuff. So the idea was to maximize the commercial. So that's what we had from the back. And the next development behind this area, I think the lane is going to be developed more and became more active type of spaces. Not right now it looks like back up a little bit, but it is south side of it, where it has more sun and better for plant to grow and nicer place to for the entrance. We feel Berwick is your correct. There is main entrance there. It should have more rendering. I did show a little bit up there, but it has developed to be the best of it can be here. But the apartment for rental lane is without it sufficient.
There's been also usually when we're sitting here, there's always a question around parking. There's generally an ask for. In this particular case, there's a lot. And what is the reason for all that added parking that you do a parkade? Because it is added.
The idea was to be as friendly as possible to pedestrians. So we are actually not producing additional parking. Right now, we're meeting the required parking. But our thought is we are providing maybe slightly higher than required. For instance, 1.5 for individual units. Bachelor or 1 bedroom, maybe they are okay with 1. So right now, the zoning bylaw treat them all the same. 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, they all require 1.5. So if the panel feel there is additional, we think we can even add another floor rental building and, and create more density. But that means they have to ask for parking areas, which is, you're trying to balance the item and you don't want to ask too much of it. It's the chance of getting on the
Okay, I guess the question is to staff then, is it misunderstanding the get along with, if you can comment on that, on the parking ratio, because it seems like it's implied that there's more than enough parking for staff.
That's correct. The parking requirement in the village neighborhood is 1 stall per residential unit. It doesn't correlate to the number of bedrooms, which are usually pointed out. So in other words, 60 residential units, they would need 60 residential parking stalls. They supply more than that, significantly more. But as Dariush indicated, they've calculated things slightly differently. So the larger units would maybe have an increased parking lot.
Sorry.
Okay, so that's
Yeah, sorry.
that's not your reaction.
I have to look at it again. I don't know where I did get 1.5, but yeah, it's a calculated 1.5. So,
There's also we've got a beautiful little pedestrian roadway that's being planned, and on the DCC, is that roadway being paid? There's a contribution, a separate contribution, as I understand it, for that road as opposed to the DCC. Also the DCCs that are that have paid.
So the roadway improvements are being paid through a local area service, which is completely independent of this proposal. Yeah, it's financed amongst the property owners that are benefiting from that work.
And then the DCCs, which the values are policy.
No, the 5,000 a meter, that's for frontage improvements for there's a maximum frontage improvements, but like I said, that has been covered off through a different route, which is the local area service. So development cost charges are separate. That's a different levy, and it has some exceptions for, rental units and various things. So it's not really a part of the discussion today. It's just a fee that's levied at the time of the building permit.
I'm just trying to get an understanding of the town's contribution and paid for by the developer.
Walter, I think is, you said, this really is not part of the discussion.
So it is, because it's a step to my next slide.
Okay,
Is there going to be any parking going along that street as we've done on Urban?
There is parking. It's slightly delineated from the roadway by bollards and a change of materials, but it's not a conventional curb and cutter.
Because you have parallel parking on Urban. You're not showing any. So,
It's very subtle. Dariush may have it on one of his slides, but we weren't prepared to discuss the roadway today.
okay, just want to get a full picture.
That's
that's the one. Yeah, here's the slide line shown here. Sorry. Yes, there is parallel parking in Berwick and also parallel parking in between the these planters and side. It's but all separated with different material and paving. It make it more pedestrian.
So if I understand, this will be on-street parking here as well. For me, it all relates to the additional parking that's in the park. Just one more thing. I've got a few other questions, but maybe somebody else.
thank you, Walter. Susan.
So noting that there's retail spaces there, is there gonna be parking for people that are actually utilizing the retail space?
It seems like we have already 30 extra parking. So I guess there is a parking at the street. I don't know. This is all dependent on the model they use. Usually, if you are providing for the people that come from outside, you want to separate them. So, I don't have that answer by part.
Oh, I
I
just-
go with the developer, but if it is, it will be, then we will have to separate them to make sure public parking is not joined with private.
Right. So that then if they're retail spots and people are having deliveries, they'll just do it from the front of the store like we do in the town. Many people don't have access at the back of the building to bring things in. They'll bring it to the front.
All have to be counted from, unless they are small items.
Right. Okay, I don't have any additional questions. I think that's pretty clear what you put together there, so thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Andrew?
Thank you. I think my notes are kind of all over the place, so I'll try and stay in the right topic. What urban and architectural design guidelines were you given when you started this project?
I'm not very sure. Really already the architect, I go with what's required in the area. We go around the city and see the area. So the guidelines, we use the city guidelines and basically try to provide as much information.
Thank you. So my next question goes to Luke. Is that all right? What urban and architectural guidelines did we give to these developers?
Sure. So then the OCP identifies the East Village as an area with sort of a unique design aesthetic that's different from the Tudor or Craftsman look in a lot of the downtown area. So that was conveyed to the architect and to the developers. That they also drew inspiration, I believe, from the brewery development, which was already in place at the time. So whereas we would typically specify things like sloped roofs and whatnot in the uptown area, the East Village was always contemplated as something that had more of the industrial flair, so more flat roofs and not necessarily the same materials you would find downtown either. So in answer to your question specifically, the intention was described to the architect, but there wasn't a specific set of design guidelines of no prescription in the same way that we would have someone else a prescription for the uptown area.
Okay. So I'm not quite sure when to make comments. So in response to that, I want it to be in the minutes or in the recording of this, that without those guidelines, the community is a sitting duck. Because the first person to come along will do what they want, and the next person will say, we're copying them. And you already said it, the brewery, right? There were no design guidelines for the brewery. So now we've got the brewery, so now we're getting something that matches the brewery. Is that what we want? I don't have an answer. I'm just asking the question. I don't feel comfortable with that. You're the second person today who's referred to the brewery as precedent. Okay.
Andrew, I know you're going to, and I share the same concern, but I think that should be
In the discussion section.
section, and perhaps in the recommendation to the council, because this is the first application where that concern has been raised. First application that didn't go forward, and the brewery was indicated. All have focused on the fact that the OCP does ask for the town to create a set of guidelines specific for, and as Luke has indicated, the intent is there, but not the guidelines.
Yeah.
So that is a concern I have as well. I think let's use that.
Okay, I'll leave that one, go to another one. So we've said all along, I mean, I've been doing this for 13 years. We've said all along we want to densify downtown. We all know this. That's right. How much do we want to densify it? And do we want to densify it all in one place? Because we've had a number of instances where people suggested, you want density, here it is, but we want it all there. We don't, where do we want our density? So my question, my comment has to do with who and what decides development density? And is it the OCP, obviously to some degree, or is it something else? So is the density determined by the need to meet profit goals in the development? Is it driven by the result of construction cost economics? Or is it actually driven by the response to the quality of life and the urban and architectural design aspirations? I really think it's incumbent on the town to try and answer those questions. Like when we're talking about density, we want to know, why are we doing this? What are we getting out of this? Or is someone just making millions of dollars out of this? I don't know. I don't have an answer to the questions, and I'm still looking for an answer. So that's my comment on where does the density come from?
I guess this question is meant for staff and me, but.
I'm sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, I can answer as my opinion, if asking me.
I think we're getting
Since
way.
what,
I may have taken this down a rabbit hole. Sorry.
no,
It's a point well taken. I don't disagree. But I think it's, isn't something that the applicant has any handle or opportunity to control or deal with. He's made his application as it is now. There are certain guidelines that are provided through the OCP, whether by intent or loose donation. And I think that's the best thing that we can deal with at this point. The other side is a recommendation to council that.
Okay, well, I said I would have difficulty triaging these, but I've got one more item. And that has to do with something that's like a broken record with me, and it's contextualism. For 10 or 12 years, I've been sitting here saying, when we get these projects, well, how does this project fit with what's next door to it? And we never seem to get drawings that show this is how this project will fit into what's next door to it. So, I mean, I could sit here if I didn't know Balkan very well and never realize that the back of this very large project faces a lumber yard because there's no contextual analysis. There's also a curious building at the end of the block owned by Chris and Naked Naturals. I don't know how that is supposed to fit into this jigsaw puzzle. But the thing that really disturbs me is I have no idea what's going across the street. And we've had development proposals brought to us for the site across the street. And we're setting a precedent for this building. Do we really want to set this precedent? How did you analyze the context?
So there is no one answer for architectural design. I have 35 years experience with many hospitals and parliaments. So I do have enough experience in architecture. When they designed the Louvre in the Paris, they put the glass block right in the middle of the century-old building. So there is no one answer in architecture or any part of the life. So yes, it's important to look at all the surrounding to design something. It's very important. You have to be cautious, and you have to make sure what you're putting as a precedent. As a start of my presentation, I did mention because the area is not developed, the only thing we have right now, brewery, which we have different opinions now, team regarding design of that building, that is relevant, but is we have to make sure we are making very neutral, simple things there to not conflict. If you have a very strong and very, highlighted building there, that's, yes, will be affected with any building. But But if you are doing something very natural, modern, straight lines and simple, this make it easier to the area to develop. That's all our attention was in here to make sure you are not highlighting anything, you are not making it, wow, you are not too quiet or too loud. It's just, it's tone is enough to work with everything. So if there is no right or wrong answer or just one answer for any time.
Thank you.
I think I'll put the other ones into discussion.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions here. As far as the parking, the residential portion, I understand, requires 6 feet, and the commercial portion requires 19 off-site, or off-street, I should say. No, I just, yeah. I'm reading your report here, which says a total of 19 off-street parking required for the commercial portion. So off-street means not on the street. It means inside. So you had indicated to Susan that this was not necessarily going to be accessible by the commercial customers. So it leads me to this: how are you monitoring the use of the parking? It's great to have all that parking, but how do you monitor the use of it by non-residents and non-residents, the security for residents versus the access by?
Yeah, and sorry, regarding the number of requirements that maybe I have from there in site particular, we do need one stone for each 30 meters from meter commercial. Based on that, 25. So regardless, for residential, 25 for commercial, for usually for commercial, right at the property line, off the street, those are just on a street one.
I know it's calling for off-street parking, so that requires in the parking area that you have on the ground.
That's
what you build. So but my question is, how are you going to control security for the residents parking and then the commercial portion?
They do have they can have even the reader on the windshield, they scan and go open or but there is lots of security systems you can put in place to allow for commercial. All of them they will be marked for who to use, and they will be actually, if the condos they will be registered in the title, but the security system will be allowed who can go and who cannot go.
So there's no designated spots of commercial.
It will be designated for condo, rental, and commercial inside the parking.
Well, I certainly suggest look at some fashion in which you can there's a demarcation between users and to ensure the security of the residents, because that's a wide open space and you've got two very big doors.
Has to be designated. Sorry, I misunderstood you.
The CRUs that you are showing on the diagrams are very large square footages with what appears to be a single door in each of the demarcated locations. How are you can you accommodate them being broken down into smaller units? Should the demand be there?
Yeah, it can go to the side.
Yeah.
Actually, provided each section they have a door, so each of these can be separated to smaller units. Because we don't have a tenant yet, we don't know how these going to be subdivided. Maybe two of them is one unit.
Okay.
Yeah, they can divide it to the very smaller.
I see. I was looking at those door designations as a double doors going into large space. What you're saying is it can rise.
That's
a
it.
door.
Yeah.
Looking at the parking area and various uses. I don't see anything for garbage or recycling. Where is that?
The recycling for the condo is in this corner. It is the enclosed area for condo. It's right at that corner. And if you go to the next page, thank you. And this is the area we are enclosing for the rental business. Maybe it's not marked.
No, it's not marked.
Yeah, sorry. It should be landscape, yeah, somewhere. It's probably it hatches under
Not overly convenient for the users, the important people that are building their units. That are going to be in that building. Podium level green space is wonderful. I think it's fantastic addition. However, is it for the exclusive use of those living in the condo and rental units, or is there going to be public access for?
obviously, we not planning to change it. What we are doing is we are separating the private area from the public area. The decks with the patios, I should say, in the main floor, that podium is with the patio, will surround it with the landscape area. We separate it as a private portion of extension of the living space, but the main access, the stairs going up and going through to that, it can be used as a public. There is no gate or anything. There will be some traffic through there, but we just want to make sure these traffic not affect the private. Yes, it will be public and private, all connected there, but somehow separate.
What is the barrier between what would be public, private, and the actual private? I just see a security issue. There's a lot of trees.
Honestly, it's all private property and private development, not public area, but because of these, you also want the person to live in the building and to go and do the shopping. You don't want them to go all around the building. You wanted to have some sort of invitation for people and some convenience to people living in the building to come through the second avenue. So that's why we created that public access, but the thing is 90% used by the tenant. But we are not paying the money for public some of the traffic. But with the landscape, the trees, papers and that kind of thing, we would like to separate.
I just see some real security issues. The rental building, are they going to be offered at market, or is it a portion of them below market to support the housing needs?
This is some question for clients. What I see in my other projects, 25 those are some they using the CMXC program financing. So one of those options, if they go to CMXC, they have to provide a percentage of the market. Those details are not set yet, but also some municipalities, they have some sort of bonusing regarding density or other stuff to go below the market. So these are the details need to be basically reviewed with the staff and the client. And end of the day, if the project makes sense to go that should move, they will go that.
Is the owner amenable to something like that?
I've seen in many of my projects, they do get the benefit of the working with it's end of the day, and as I said, I've been 35 years. It makes sense, and if developer should they make it profit, but it has to be. If it not make sense, nobody gonna do it. Nowhere, never any development happen if there is not financing benefits on it.
Okay, just that, Rebecca, can you put up A1.1?
A 1.1.
A1.1.
That's the one.
I think that's A 1.1.
That, oh, I'm sorry. The yellow, the entrance off of
Is it right here?
that portion of Berwick is facing retail across the street. And is there a possibility of relocating those storage? That's about 80 parking stalls. You've got a surplus, moving those in somewhere else, and continuing the commercial element of along Berwick to complement that which is across from the brewery, which would provide more commercial.
I think that's an excellent idea. What we did suggested, actually, this is our suggestion. We don't know who is the tenant. I put the like patio type of restaurant there. It makes sense that you have a program the other side. Yes, it's excellent idea. We can extend the commercial down there and move those. So for those there is a bike storage, obviously we need to access from outside. That is, I think that should be there, but this storage can also else to.
So in doing that, I think there should be a rendering that is along Berwick facing west, so that it shows the rendering that you provided here are nice. Doesn't show that element, which is an important element in it. It's interfacing with existing. So I think we would want to recommend that while you're considering the extra CRU, that the rendering be shown.
Yeah, for sure. We have a little bit pushed forward. This is supposed to be in June. We lost the 2 weeks. The idea was to, the Berwick side, we are actually taking the landscape architect, really wall and great and lots of green space coming down. So yeah, it's that side of it's showing mostly second, but I think this side is as important if not more.
So along those lines, the podium level, the commercial level is very austere. It's very austere, it's very plain, it's very monolithic. There's really no excitement. Yes, you articulated a bit with the entrances off the street, but when you look at the renderings, it's brick and concrete and glass. It's really not very interesting when you compare it to what is across the street with the use of wood, with the use of the wall, with the use of other material, which is concrete.
Yeah, that is a very good idea. We didn't get the chance to more develop there. There's a trellises extending the patios, coverage, that type of can help a lot. I agree. We didn't put those on. Should be.
I think Walter and energy efficient. I can go other than to ask that in the arcade portion, will there be charging stations, EV charging stations?
Majority of this municipality these days they're asking, I don't know the requirement, but what I see, 10% actually the chargers that were the required parking and like 20% rough things for future extension. So, yeah, it's because we have the underground parking, it's very easy to add these things because it's already, you don't need to dig the ground to go, can have exposed in concrete exposed.
So
Yeah, so I will say yes, we will have at least
10% installed and 20% roughly.
These are the sample of other municipality requirements. I cannot say, 100% say these are the ones we're gonna follow, but I think we'll be.
It's something that you've done before, comfortable with, and we asked.
Yeah, 10% is very standard.
In your presentation, when you're looking at the on second, the walkway, the stairs going up, you indicated that there was a water, but well, we're not sure about the waterfall, and I don't see it on some of the other drawings.
We started with the waterfall, but the developer, landscape architect and all, we know what's the practical thing of that. And we end up with in Parksville, called nice waterfall, but never on. So, because of the maintenance, I guess. So, we thought if the planting is probably more practical, that's what changed. We started.
Those are most of my questions now. We'll just go back and see if there's any further ones. Andrew, do you have any? No.
Yes.
Through the chair to Luke, just wondering, I haven't been paying too much attention. What is happening with the courtyard area? Will that continue to have surplus parking? Will we, like right now, it's looking beautiful for the new front cedar, but will that continue to be there?
Sure.
Which will serve as that area as well.
Through the chair, the long-term plan is to find another location for the works yard. So there is parking to the rear of front and cedar. That may be reconfigured at some point, but the town has always identified that there needs to be some communal parking in that location because some was displaced in the second half of the east.
Perfect, thank you.
Walter?
I've got a couple of questions. And it refers back to the form character guidelines that we're left with, the village guidelines. And well, we got the package alluded to or the staff. That's what we got right now to work with. And so there's a bunch of, I've done in front of me, and one of the things that actually Bill brought it up in terms of the podium. In those guidelines, it said access to large expanse of flat plane on broken wall surfaces or massive concrete structure is not recommended. Okay, and that's in the uptown, and yet it's referred to in this application for by staff. And so the question would be, can you look at something else in terms of those expanses of concrete? Maybe take brick out and word concrete, brick, and also look at things like some of the canopies that are suggested in current as something that could be used for this project. And use some of the ideas that Urban has, some of the ideas that the village has right now, village guidelines are shown. There's so many things because right now, the way I see it is concrete. I actually like it, but I'm really not thinking it's going to work as well as we want. But those, and you've got panels of brick. Perhaps it can be something else. They could be, these canopies that come up and over. There's some modern ways of doing that that could show different ways of using that, making it more of an outdoor space, if that's what it's going to be used. I would drawing board. As those types of ideas, have you, can you get around looking at that? Does that fit into what you see? You don't have to answer, because I've got a couple other questions. Alludes to what Bill was saying about that green area or the yellow area. Entry, big to bring up a one. Maybe you can comment. See where you've got the yellow? That there, if the reason I like it is that you have an opportunity there for landscape. And like you say, the chair, or outdoor space and activity. If you did the same thing, perhaps, over on the east or in the west, in the northwest corner, something very similar. So that there would be a landscape on the street that could be used. And the reason I'm bringing these up is you've got parking, you've got lots of parking. Maybe some of the commercial space could be picked up by parking. These are just ideas. I don't know if it's all been thought through.
Sure. Two questions. So
Yeah.
the first one, let us start with the last one before I forget. There are already lots of planters and things on plants. And we don't, also you are working in the what you have bit of the site, what you can do. Because of the two very efficient law of the parking, we end up with that much of space. And we wanted to maximize the commercial space. I'm going to connect this answer with the first your question regarding concrete and brick. These are all the materials in our hands to work with. The work cannot, not big concrete building, is not allowed. It's just typical the work is not, if you are articulated enough to work with these materials, you can make it. But I'm not saying this is what I did is perfect, but I'm saying I did work with this material to break it down, make it the panel. In reality, it's going to be concrete building because of the structure. But we have planters in the top. We can break those planters down, use the concrete area, and basically created something like green type of the wall all through. And these connecting your main floor to upper floor is ambience of the space. It's not just for the material, how you put these materials together. So yes, it will be nice, wise entrance for the rental apartment. It will be there, but then we are using the commercial space. It's the area I think in order to develop commercial, and in order the commercial to survive, the people to go to those commercial spaces. So it's all balancing. We can develop this project more further in detail and hopefully more suit to all the panels, heads. But this is also part of the we are open to listen and get the advice we need and make our project.
The question then is, can we take out 15 stalls and 15 stalls, put it to good commercial, and give more of an entrance back to the apartment, the rental apartment, And would that work, pick up 15, because you've got more than enough
We
parking?
do, but they are right back in the underground. Cannot put the more commercial back there, so we are using all the frontage for commercial. It's practically, yes, you know, we talk about moving those storage, yeah, because we have extra, we can put those storage right in this end and extend there, but we don't have more frontage to add more commercial somewhere else. So that's the challenge of the project.
A couple of other quick cleanup things here. On the air podium, the diagonal parking cleanup. And again, there's that band that we're talking about, rear landscape band. It's interrupted by that. Could we take maybe 4 spaces either side of that entry?
Yeah, it's
And just have one entry, so that you've actually got more of a landscape. Very moving.
yeah, what we started for these parking actually, these are kind of visitor parking, they're coming and going and they need to provide now have easy access. And also for almost to work at the building too, people are moving in and out. So for sure we can reduce couple of and more landscape. But I think we should have enough for visitors there and not less. And so whatever is that visitor number is, and we get that, make sure we have enough. For visitors.
I think I just got most of my answers. Oh, yeah. What's driving the walkway to why don't we, like,
This
is
one,
there, because it's a set of stairs. And so it's not really accessible. Overboats are not going to be using that as much as perhaps some of the younger ones. And whereas if you look at the west side, you've got a panel of landscape, soft landscape. You have to work at it. It's popping from the building and the next door. Was there any thought? Maybe that's a good place to put pedestrian. Because then you could just grade it down.
I understand security as
Yeah.
mentioned. But you know, if we didn't have that, we have to just put other access, and that's it. And I think with this one, breaking this control, making the tenants of the to come and access that restaurant or buy something and come back. And when you live in a place, is actually creating a different type of perspective, landscape, nice area you are going to, and that's the feel of that space. And this is the I think this is one of the nicest space in this project for the tenant. And it's taking away, it's not going to improve anything. And you're just taking away one of the nice feeling going through in this area from that I cannot give you the money or any other side something materialize reason for the having that. They can give you the feeling and that what you and this act. That's my point.
So if I understand, it's a feature for the residents.
Yeah.
That's not as much a feature for people that are on the street. These would be.
Yeah, the future for the tenant,
That's kind of people. This is for the community, but it's not. walkway. That's where these Bill's question was. But
Yeah, thank you, Walter. I just have one follow-up with that. The entrance to the condo portion building, is it off the walkway, the central walkway, or off the board, or is there an entrance to both?
If you go to the. It is actually off the, coming to the lobby, the drop of package. In the elevator. So and the exit is directly there too. So it is from off the curb, but we also have access from parking, and also they do have access to the podium as well. But the main entrance is the curb, is basically the address of the building. Posted there.
Is on
There.
okay, but you haven't shown us an illustration that would show what that looks like. And from what I see on these footprints,
Looks like that, it looks like,
no, there isn't one at all.
That's the basically
Yeah.
the entrance. This is the area green wall, mesh, distance from the building.
So that's a secured entrance as well.
That's
There's a
secured.
lobby that
Lobby.
celebrates the entrance.
Yeah,
So
for sure, we provide those
when
elevation.
you do the extra CRU and showing the rendering for Berwick, and including that, we should illustrate that, because I think that's an important element. And that is going to be the address and main entrance to the home, and that's important.
Correct.
So I guess we'll move on to more questions. Then we'll go for comments. Susan, what comment?
Well, like Darush, I love the pathway to both buildings. I think that's, it brings that warmth that I like to see. I don't like to see a big building with nothing. And I love that it's, separating the whole situation from my point of view. Access points are really great. So when I enter to the apartment side of it, I would imagine the first thing you're going to enter is an elevator that gets you into that building. And so the condo building, you have 3 entrances and 2 entrances. And same with the apartment buildings, and everybody gets to access walking, which is what we do in Colton, is that we sit in between buildings here. We don't actually go on the street side most of the time. I think that I love that it's all very visual, that there can be nice little retail shops in there. So it will be pretty based on retailers doing their window displays there. I do believe that that garden around the apartment at the base is going to make it look really special. Like it's the greenery is really, to me, if it was just a straight building without that level of garden, it would be a really dull thing to look at. So I'm really impressed with that. So I love the plants, the glass, the walkway, and the verandas. That concept is awesome for those people that are on the lower floors and have people looking down upon them. Probably the enviable reverse penthouse idea, really. So I applaud you on the design. And, a couple of years ago, we looked at a design that was going to be work live, and it wasn't going to be it was going to be fantastic, but this is much prettier. And I think it really says all of them has a population that, that we really don't see. And as far as the problem that we have right now is there's no place for people to live. So the fact that there's going to be rentals and not just condos is amazing. I know so many people that are looking for homes. So I've got to say that that's really rocking at 40 suites for people that are displaced right now, trying to find places to live. Storage units are more busy than anything because nobody has a place to put their stuff. So that's all really looking good to me. don't know comments about what's to be in the future about around the rest of the area. I would imagine that it will be more of your Vancouver urban setting kind of idea. And I think that's what I caught 2 years ago when we did the reviewed a few projects in this area, was that we want it to be different than the Tudor Sound Quality Beach. So I think it really hits every note. If I could ask one question, is the towers, little tower, the brown towers on the corners, those there, what are they made of? Okay. Yeah. Between, I just wanted, I wasn't quite clear that that's where that was going. Thank you. I think that's all I can say. It's looking pretty.
Thank you. Actually, thinking maybe those
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I might not on that. Susan, do you have any recommendations that we would want to pick up in our motion? Okay. And, Andrew,
Okay, you'll have to make sure I don't get a line here. So
I let the time go.
I'm trying to group my comments. So my understanding is that I'm just making comments. This is not a discussion. So yeah.
This is your point of view.
So-
Any recommendations that you have to the applicant for us?
Okay, so I mean, I've been a planner for 40 years. I'm an architect and been involved in all kinds of projects. Planning is incremental. We can't solve all our problems in one project. And design is a series of compromises. I'm interested in the fundamental objectives of what we're trying to do. So my comments are trying to address my concerns about fundamental objectives as I understood them. In terms of form and character, I think there's a basic problem with massing and density. That's my view. Qualicum is Qualicum. We don't have any buildings 6 stories high. We don't have any buildings built on parking podiums. I know that the topography in this area gives a slight advantage in terms of building height, but I don't think Qualicum is ready for a 6-story high building. I also think that in terms of the blocking and massing, the buildings are out of scale. We don't have anything this big. We might eventually have something that's big on the waterfront, but we'll see. The problem, as I see it as a person with an architectural background, is that when you start doing essentially a orthogonal building, a box on its own, it runs the risk. And I know you're trying to be neutral and inoffensive with the design. I appreciate that. It's a simple thing to do. But you run the risk of becoming a repetitive facade and of it becoming a very anonymous looking building. And that's definitely not what people want here, in my experience. One of my main problems with this is my understanding of the East Village was always going to be a very, very interactive, multifunctional, pedestrian-friendly, homologous area. And over again in this discussion, I heard, no, the residents are up here, the commercial's down here. This is the opposite of what I thought we were trying to do. I thought we were trying to create a really interactive public space. And I'm really puzzled by the entrances to these residential units because they're largely visible. They're hidden. I mean, main entrance to the rental units is gonna be off the lane where the building center is. I just don't get it. And there's no design work done for the lane. I love our lanes. I think we're doing some good work with lanes around the town. But there's nothing saying that's a pedestrian space. There doesn't seem to be any other way to get there, other than down the lane. Maybe I'm wrong. In terms of the walkway between the buildings, it's all very well to say it's nice and green, it's got a nice flight of stairs. But if I'm a disabled person, I'm not going there, and I can't get there. In fact, I can't even get to the street. And we're trying to create a pedestrian-friendly community, and I can't even get to the street from the building because I'm stuck on 100 cars. Okay, just as another detail, the lovely green landscape areas in front of the level 1 units are just great, except for one small problem, and that is the way your faces. They face north, and there'll never be any sunlight on that side of the building. And you may get 2 days in late June where you get the sun at the end of the day, but remember you're down lower. So that doesn't convince me at all. The street frontage is purely commercial. And I've heard that over and over again. And I don't know if anyone did any studies on our retail space in Qualcomm. A lot of it's empty. And I don't know if anyone reads about economic projections, but everywhere commercial space is having a serious problem. We're building more. There's no one here to rent it that I know of. There's no one here. We need health clinics and daycares. Put down there. That'd be great. But the idea of just doing a Robinson Street row of commercial space, I think it's over. I think it's over. I think that most people in our society own too much, and they're not going to buy as much. And I think there's a big crunch coming. So I question the validity of that whole thinking about just turning it into play class shops. It doesn't convince me. It doesn't sound like that's what we're doing. Most people here aren't buying all this stuff. They're retired, they buy coffee, and they buy muffins, and they go to the hardware store. But we've got big stores here that have been empty for a long time. And we're having to subdivide them. We don't know what to do with them. We got another development 1 block up where they're trying to add 3 big stores. I don't know. So it's not convincing to me. I'm gonna go over some of these things. I'm gonna skip through. So I don't feel like it's resident friendly. I really don't. I feel like the residents have been put up there, and I don't feel like it's resident friendly. And I feel like 190 parking spaces is very revealing because we wanted this to be a pedestrian space, but actually it's a car space. That's why we built the podium. And I think we're really off base from where we could be going, and it doesn't feel as sensitive to me as I think it should. And I'm going to suggest that we don't accept the proposal as it is because of the building height and the massing, and because of the focus on the commercial street interface at the expense of the residents and pedestrians. That's what I have to do. I'm sorry to say that, but everyone can vote against it. Is that okay? Those are your words. It's okay.
I generally have some words and stuff.
Not at this point, it's not a question, this is no comments, but thank you. Walter?
Yeah, I what you're saying, Andrew, when we first saw the vision, so to speak, there was people in the streets, there were kids, and there was all kinds of things going on the street, and that's why I keep coming back. We're building a community of cars here, and that's why my first question is, why all these cars? And can we put that emphasis more on the activities on the street? Then isn't gonna be specialized. I really believe that. I think the two blocks of residential condominium parking, they can only do an awful lot for that street. But you gotta get them from off the podium down to the street and just make it much more interactive that way. And that's why I keep coming back to what's happening in front of the building for the condos as opposed to the apartments, where it's looking at the Windsor parking lot. That's where it's faced. And I think if we can get them down on the street and actually give the residents in the apartment an address, like who wants to have an address on the lane? And that's kind of where I was going right from the very beginning. And if it means additional space on the lower plateau where the parkade is, but other things in there that might really be more of a people place. And like we're trying to get cars off the street, so we're trying to get net zero. We're trying to reduce carbon emissions. We're trying to do all of that. We're building more spots for cars, and those are comments. When it comes to this is where I don't agree with Andrew. But I see the importance of trying to preserve our land, our property, and one way we do it is I think we have to start looking at going up. We may not always like it, but we should be going up because we're getting less and less land that are going to be usable space. And, height to me is not as much of a problem too, because I've been doing this for so long, and I started building 4-story buildings on the gorge of Victoria, and we're still building 4-story buildings, and we're still have been able to achieve the housing that's needed. And what we built back then wasn't good enough, and we've got a very good opportunity to do better building and doing better than what we've always done. The other thing is, when you say village, you start thinking about it. It's got every component to it has its own individuality as well. And you have the flower shop, you have the clinic, you have the bakery, and every one of those things has its own identity. And I'm not really sure that can be expressed on the streetscape that we're showing right now. And when I first saw it, I thought, this is awesome. And then the more you think about it, that there's people on that street. And then you start thinking about the individual store owners and what they're going to be doing. We want to give them a place. Even in our, when you go into some of our stores, well, actually, Quality Foods is a good example. There's different identities that are in the store, inside the store, which is that if that can be picked up on the streetscape there and not make it a mall like we've got Woodbrook. I think we can do better. That's my view. And so I don't have any like to make some recommendations. I actually like the project. I think it's stately. You got two buildings. I think the residents are going to be beautiful spaces. It speaks of wellness, speaks of light coming in. It speaks of having a way of looking out. I think the experience the residents are going to have, it's going to be great. I think people are looking from the street up. They're going to think, yeah, geez, I'd like to get up there and have a look up. That experience is there. I think so. The condos and the apartments, I think they do work. And the height issue, that's opinion. As far as I'm concerned. Bill, your turn.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you. Well, there we go. 2 sides of the equation. Well, from my point of view, it meets the intent of the OCP. And I think that certainly is the only guidelines that we have to follow. Is what the OCP indicated the intent of these village guidelines would be. But when we look at the other elements of the OCP, density, diversity, pedestrian orientation, energy efficiency, the policies that are related directly to East Village, the fact that it's multi-use residential, commercial, it meets what the OCP and what the citizens of Qualicum in creating the OCP were looking for. I appreciate where Andrew's coming from, and I appreciate where Walter's coming from, but first in is going to decide what the rest of it's going to be like. The first element we had, or the first application we had, was for low-rise, multi-residential with some commercial. Whatever reason that didn't go forward, but it had an industrial look that was taken up by the brewery, which I think has turned out, in my estimation, to be a landmark for this street. If we go over 2 streets to 4th Avenue, or 4th Street, I should say, on the corner of Warwick, there was a residential multifamily plopped into the middle that looks very industrial and fits in sort of the theme, I believe, most of was looking for, but hasn't been able to articulate. So we've already established now this, I guess, Robinson Street look, but more to industrial vein, I guess. The 4 to 5 stories, I think to Walter's point, we have very little land, affordable land in Qualicum to create affordable, but to create housing. This is one thing that the OCP was looking for, is the efficient use of land, and this is definitely efficient use of land. 120, at least 120 people are living, which in my estimation would be a great start to supporting the commercial element that is there. If we look at the activity that's at the Fervent Cedar now, there's no one living here, but you can't find a place to park, you can't find a place to sit and eat. So it shows that if you build it, they will come. And so the 4 or 5 stories, it really doesn't bother me. It's sloping. You've adapted the building to the buildings to the slope. There is a concern with the overshadowing, but the sun happens to be very low in the winter in those 2 months, December, January, are the 2 that really the shadows are dealing with, or the shadow effect, I should say. Again, if in fact this development is approved and goes forward, you've now set the design standard for across the street and everywhere else within the industrial area, south of, or I should say, east of Memorial and over the years. So first is design set the standard. I go back to my question earlier about the sort of the bland look of the commercial, the concrete and brick. Really, it's not really exciting for pedestrians. Perhaps what's inside in the stores may be more attractive, but you haven't presented anything. The celebration of the commercial area. And then going back to how Walter had alluded to in terms of the East, because there is no design guidelines for each village, the OCP indicates that you go to the village design guidelines, which talks about awnings and things that hang out from the building, that gives it some articulation and some definition. Ornamental lighting, gooseneck sort of, which brings in again that industrial look. Um, And again, I think if you look at, you don't want to duplicate what the Sword and Cedar has done or what was done over on 4th Street, but you certainly would want to look at creating sort of a neo-industrial look, which I think you're getting to, but this is very Burnham-ish. I'm not sure whether Qualicum is ready for that, but that is the nature of architectural design these days. And again, how can you get density and still have a lot of articulation? I'm not sure. And I think when you look at the OCP, there is talk that they didn't want to duplicate what was in the village neighborhood. This had to be unique there, and we've already started with these. And I think this does that too. And I don't disagree with some of the points that Andrew. Those are, but the land is there, it's empty, we need to put something there. Not just because this is an application, but I think it is a step forward. So I have some, if we go forward with recommendation to council, I've got some items that I'd like to add to it. But, would anybody else like to add anything to comments? Well, we have a motion. I think, again, we're going to divide this as a zoning application as well as a development. So we're going to do two motions. One is a motion to agree or not agree that the zoning amendment from industrial 1 to complex development 19 is that we would recommend to council. So if someone, did you agree with that? If someone would go forward with that?
Sure, I'll make a motion.
Is there a discussion? Being none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, next would be recommendation to council development application. So I'm open to hearing a motion, yea or nay. Then we can go
I'll make a motion.
to, so the motion would be that the APC supports the development application for 126. Second, that be subject to the following recommendations. Okay. You have some recommendations.
No. I do agree with them moving the historic center.
Okay. So that is what I mentioned about creating additional CRU by moving storage.
Yes, I'd like to make a couple of recommendations with respect to the first landscape, the perimeter, and how that's lane, what we can do on the lane so that we have a continuous landscape. Interrupted with an entry. With a couple of parking stalls, each parking stall, if you could get 10 in there. But rather than having that, there's actually one. The other is that I'd like to see people recommend that there is actually an entry off the side of I would also like to the walkway through the building. see the importance of it for the residents. Open up the adaptability, accessibility, right? Perhaps look at it differently or accessible. Making it accessible, take on for all of us and people. If we can. Maybe look at.
And what can I just, I know that Rebecca is advocating, but just what you said, you lost me. And I think Luke might be too. So I know that you're making comment around your recommendation, but we need a little more specific with the recommendation, what it is you want.
Very long-winded recommendation.
I think
Basically, it's
uh,
a reconsideration of the walkway through. And it's accessible.
and what is with the reconsideration?
Perhaps relocate to the west side. I'm not sure. I don't see how it works.
I think Luke is anxiously wanting to check.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a procedural recommendation. Maybe after individual members make a recommendation specific to, subject to, you can vote on that every time. So in other words, Walter says one thing, you vote, so that Rebecca doesn't have to at the end recount 15 motions and it's complicated and you have to negotiate the word. So just one at a time and then you can vote on it.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
Consideration for existing parking, increasing an entry for the secondary apartment and in the business and commercial areas. Commercial reduce parking. The consideration for articulation in front of the building. Using canopy. Smart landscape. Color. Thank you for me to propose.
Covered our looking for. Andrew, I know you don't agree with this, but it's if in fact the motion is successful. It's on the agenda.
If the motion is successful, is there something I'd like to add?
I know you have concerns with the overall project, but if in fact not the project that are successful in the recommendation, is there something that you would like to see if in fact this came to fruition, even though you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to see it reduced by 1 floor. Yeah,
And both,
I don't know about those, but the condominium, yeah, definitely. And I share the same concern as Walter about the confusing access and the lack of visual entrances and the kind of level of the visual animation of the street, fresh air, all this kind of stuff. So, but I don't know if I would vote for it still.
I know, because the rest of
Yeah.
your concerns have been addressed. All right, then, we won't deal with all of the ones suggested by Luke, but I think we need to hear a recap of what they are. So that
Sure. Okay. So I think I got some of it, but certainly if there's comments, 'cause I don't know if I have that the Advisory Plan Commission supports the development application for 126, 130, 134, 144, and 148 Second Avenue East, subject to the following recommendations. Create an additional CRU on Berwick Road by moving the storage to the interior of the parking area. Continuous landscaping with access to parking spaces. Reduce parking at an entrance off of Second Avenue to the apartment block. Reconsider the walkway between the two buildings to the west side and make the walkway accessible. Consider articulation for the front of the building using canopy, lighting, hard landscaping, color, and building finishes for the lower podium, and the condominium be reduced by 1 story.
Well,
There's one other thing that is, there should be consideration of something.
Just use your microphone.
I'm maybe I'm wrong, but I thought maybe that you go up the stairs and turn to the entrance. But that side is out. Sure accessible? So stairs in the back.
I think there's something else that we investigated. Should we encourage that? And also the consideration you give it to the whole market.
I mean, who are we getting about rental units? What control do we have? We've been talking about this for years. What control do we have over whether they're rental, whether they're market value, whether they're subsidized? We don't seem to have any control.
We don't, and if we don't, this is a recommendation. Council has, perhaps they can do something.
Okay.
The reality is probably many to be done, but as a
Just for clarification, so when the town requires that something be rental, it is rental.
yes.
Yeah, so I wouldn't, I don't want anyone to think that it's totally out of our hands and we can't specify these things, so. Okay.
The 219 covenant is to reduce the restriction. And then what I'm asking for is for the applicant to see if they could incorporate the low market units within the rental. So, shall we go through these one at a time? Is there any more recommendations? None. Okay, Rebecca, the first one.
Create an additional CRU on Berwick Road by moving the storage to the interior of the parking area. continuous landscaping with access to parking spaces.
Go ahead.
Continuous landscape.
Great. What's- so no, can I have 10%? Next.
Reduce parking.
This would be a consideration. Yes. Space, the parking is going to be
Commercial. And
I don't know how you. Commercial.
we take a rural park now. Add it to that.
Okay. Thanks. We'll go with that. All those in favor?
Well, it's a majority.
Great. There's, yes, so.
Yeah. Oh,
Thank you.
are you against? Okay.
And it's abstaining, so that is lost. Next one.
Add entrance off of Second Avenue to the apartment.
All those in favor? Yes.
Yes.
So it's carried. And again, well, I don't want to be recorded, recording change. I'm against it. So we'll, you're abstaining. Yes. Even. Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
sorry for just a procedural clarification, but if Andrew's abstaining, that's a vote against.
Oh,
So if it's, yeah, that's correct. So the last one, which is two of you voted in favor of, that would technically fail,
oh, true.
unless,
Okay.
So, but gonna come back with, however, Andrew. Bring, see that this is where. Philosophically, Andrew. Yeah.
No, let's not get into. I'm against, he's against the motion. So, so what we're going to do is have. Rather than stating then it makes it simple. Okay, so all of his abstentions were negative, so the last one, did not carry. So that's,
So the main entry is off. Just to be clear.
let's go back to the record. That one.
Sure. Add an entrance off of Second Avenue to the apartment block.
Well,
Reconsider the walkway between the two buildings to the west side and make the walkway accessible.
all those in favor? Yes. Close.
Next, so consider articulation for front of the building using lighting, hard landscape, color, and building finishes for the lower podium.
Sure. Next.
The condominium be reduced by 1 story.
All those in favor? No.
consideration of accessibility requirements so pedestrians can get to the street level.
This one, whatever happens.
Consideration be given to providing below market rental units.
Here.
Okay. That's all. Yeah.
I consider those to be all amendments to the main motion, so now you need to vote on the main motion. Right, you were adding all those little individual things.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll now vote on the motion as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Bill and I had a discussion before the meeting, and thank you. And I think it's a process. And it's because we're stumbling over some things with regards to things like energy efficiencies. We're stumbling over some of the guidelines that are. I'd like to make a motion, notice a motion that we have a look at that. The future, maybe together with staff, maybe a couple of our just members.
We're making motions and not notice of motions. That's, I don't think, applicable here. I think from our discussion, I think we need to have a little more thought about it before we throw this at the council. I think it's a valid point. And I think that there should be some thought about the direction we request council to make on the actual design, the guidelines for the East Village. Because this project may or may not go forward. We may still have a blank piece of property. So rather than today, I think we should look at for our next meeting.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what happened in this meeting. And I feel like we were set up. I'm being really blunt. In the absence of design guidelines, I don't know what we're trying to do. So how can we evaluate a proposal? We don't have a context to evaluate it. I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying, I've been saying it for 4 or 5 years. I originally suggested these to actually that we needed to do design guidelines to flesh out what we were trying to do, and what were the principal design features of the urban space and the built form. We still haven't done it, and we're paying the price. I think there's a lot of good things. I'm really at a loss as to how to evaluate it because we don't have a concept. So I feel it's very hard on a commission member to work intelligently in the absence of what the goalposts really are. But I hope we can do better with it.
I was just going to suggest if the committee's all done with the applicants and
We have.
all the staff, they could head on out, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
We may continue
Thank
on.
you very much for that presentation.
See you guys. Thanks.
Sorry. But to Andrew's point, I understand, and I'm a full believer that we need to have guidelines here for this and future applications. But in its absence, there are directions as loosened and what have you. The intent is there. We have had one project already basically set the tone. So I agree, and I think that we should push that to council, but we have been given this as a maybe.
Which project are you referring to?
I'm referring to
Oh, well, when this hits the community, we'll have something to talk about.
Oh, I'm sure it will. They're already started out there now. That's why we want to ensure that this kind of conversation and discussion is available to the community now before you get to the council and you get these prolonged public hearings or at public information sessions held by the developer. Plans to go forward, that some questions based on the information here can be provided to them for clarification or for assistance in compatible urban design. So I think that's important. So I would certainly support what you just said, about the motion to council about getting down to creating design, the actual design guidelines for East Village that were called for by the OCP. So I'm not sure how we want to word that it's not offending.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, making another comment, it's not really relevant. I mean, the elephant in the room is this is a development project, and the elephant in the room is money.
Oh,
And I just think the developers, whether they realize it or not, they do, are holding the community hostage because of our ambiguity design guidelines. They can do whatever they want. They could say 5 stories, 6 stories, they said 6 stories. They didn't. And I'm annoyed. There's no point being annoyed. It's just the situation I'm in. But I think it's very, very unfair.
would we like to make that recommendation to council regarding
No,
I think
What
we,
are
I
we
think
thinking
we
of
tried,
doing?
I think we tried to do that with the first application. Where we were really confused about what we were supposed to measure the application against. And basically what the application said. So,
and,
Now we just
the standard for 6-story building. Well, we're not sure the council approved that. So do we want to go forward with that recommendation to council to go forward with establishing design guidelines for this village as indicated as requested?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I don't know what good it'll do because they might approve this project now, and so that's the guideline. I was on the commission when the Railway Avenue townhouse development came on the other side of the street. I mean, it had front doors facing the street. It was a people's space. It was a beautiful design and was sold as property. And when I first saw the notice, I thought, oh, that's important. And then find out it's the other side of the street. If they do build any townhouses on the other side of the street now, they'll all be looking at 6-story buildings. So
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a motion that we make a recommendation to council that specific design guidelines for the East Village be pursued post haste to ensure that future applications have some criteria with which to bring their applications forward.
now in fairness to today's applicant, if this is going to be brought before council, then they that throw out this application.
well,
That's exactly this. We haven't had guidelines yet when the OCP is approved. We still haven't had guidelines. at this point. And so I don't think that we're just going to rush to put these things done. When you look at the amount of workload that the staff have now, that is a difficult thing on them. I don't think it'll be there. Council could This will probably come, this application comes along before that. Well, I don't think it's a consideration. The OCP clearly states that these guidelines are supposed to be established, and they haven't been. So what we're seeing is that we're struggling with every application that comes forward because we have no specific criteria other than intent in the wording of the OCP. So what we're asking for is some hard and fast guidelines that provide us with the criteria just to measure future developments. That's. Can you turn it around?
If the Urban Cedar voted on that, and I believe our opinion was yes, that we agreed with that project. That was the first thing that created the form of character that we're kind of following, that urban lifestyle situation, and that's what I think presented in that network, in that area. That's something my concern is that we've already passed through that whole.
We haven't really, we just basically, it was a one-off. And we looked at the intent, the OCP, to create guidelines. From that first hearing that we had, where it was, this was an industrial area. The OCP says that these villages have a unique style. And we saw the one that was having an industrial, Urban Cedar followed with that. So we need to establish, is the industrial or the industrial, the design guidelines that council holds.
Trying to think about how to bring some focus to the discussion points, and I think it ultimately is up to council, but if they approve this second development, then and they approve the front cedar, then clearly there's some satisfaction with that aesthetic. So I think it could be worded something like, that if council is satisfied with the design aesthetic of this development and the previously approved development at front cedar, that this be articulated in a set of design guidelines for future reference in other development applications. In other words, like if you like that, then write it down.
I think that's
I
excellent.
definitely bring it to them as a question.
So that's well, that doesn't. It's the question actually directs them to make a decision.
If you like this, then this is where this will become the guideline.
So we